everybody. Welcome to episode 5 of our educational series. Today, we are going to discuss DMARC, DKIM and SPF with our friend Dave. Dave, if you'd like to introduce yourself, then we can go ahead and get started.
Hey everyone, I'm the co-founder of Cyber Synergies, where we our security is our passion, but helping businesses succeed is our goal.
Ooh, that was
Excellent.
very marketing tagline-ish. I like it.
I'll put that in the description.
Yes, for sure. So we're going to kind of give you a brief overview of DMARC, talk about some of the benefits, and we're going to specifically speak to, although we'll probably add in a little bit of extra information because configurations do vary slightly depending on your provider. But we're going to talk about Office or Microsoft 365 as they've recently branded it too. And we use CLOUDFLARE and then also configuration of bulk email service. In this case, we'll be speaking about MailChimp, but there are many out there. So you'll have to check with your providers to see what configuration they require. We also have a couple of additional considerations for you to talk about. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So DMARC, Domain-Based Message Authentication Reporting and Conformance Policy. This is a proposed standard and it allows email senders and receivers to cooperate. So they're going to share information about the emails they send to each other, the legitimacy of those emails, and it protects your domain name, the from field, against spoofing. So, just like regular mail, your email has an envelope, it has a greeting, return address, and so on. And then it also has headers. So inside of that envelope, there'll be headers such as who the author was, the subject date, who it was addressed to. So it's really protecting that from field to ensure that there's some legitimacy there, some assurance there that you are who you say you are when you're sending this mail, and then it keeps it out of your junk mail folders.
Good overview.
Yeah, and feel free to jump in anytime. If somebody has something to add, please do. So this slide kind of gives you an overview. This is from the dmarc.org site that just kind of gives you the little bit of a flow there, high level of how this works. They compose and send the email. Your mail server puts the DKIM header in there with your key and sends it out. And then when they receive it, the email system on the receiving end will take a look at what you have set up. DMARC is a combination of using both SPF, which we'll talk about later, as well as DKIM, which also we will cover here shortly.
We will cover what those acronyms mean, right?
Yes, we will.
Excellent.
Absolutely. Just a tease.
Make sure you spell those acronyms correctly, too.
Yes. Okay. And then you have a couple of, go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the things that DMARC also does for you is it increases the deliverability of email. In some cases, without it, you might see email go to like your spam folder or something, and it might have been an email you're receiving from somebody with no problem into your inbox, and all of a sudden it starts going into your spam folder, and that can be part of the reason why, because you don't have a DMARC policy in place.
And that's exactly what was happening with the CSA West Michigan chapter, is that we initially were sending out our event notifications and things like that, and things were working okay. And then one day people were like, "Hey, we aren't seeing emails from you anymore. When are your events? What's going on?" And we found out that, oh, we need to get our DMARC records set up. It's going to people's spam inbox, mailboxes. So yeah, we got that set up, and it really helped address that. And as the systems process it, you're gonna, and we'll get into this, I think, in a minute, where you can do a pass, a quarantine, or a flat out reject, and there's some different reporting you can get. So we'll dive into that a little bit, but this gives you a little bit of an overview on what DMARC is and how it works. These are this is an example of some headers. I copied this out of what you would see from the Outlook client sending from the CSA domain. I did obscure a few things here, although most of this is in the DNS records. You can look up anybody's DMARC records. So this kind of gives you a feel for, you can see here that you've got your SPF record here showing that it passed DKIM, it passed DMARC checks. So everything looks good here. The receiving mail system is going to go, yep, this looks like it's actually from who they say it's from, and we're going to go ahead and deliver that to the inbox. And you can see here that we're, CSA is authorized to send from that mail domain. Anything anybody wants to add here about the headers before we move on?
Yeah, well, one thing I would say about DMARC, essentially too, is part of it is deciding, when you first set it up, are you going to set it up in your mode as far as none versus quarantine versus reject? And I think it's important to speak about the fact that most people are going to want to start at none just because you don't want to start dropping email unbeknownst. If you're not pulling reporting or anything like that, you could also start getting complaints that people aren't receiving email. But what I would also say is that 80% of domains out there that have actually enabled DMARC never moved from none to reject. So it's not actually even doing
Fact.
what it could be doing. So yeah.
That is a fact.
So benefits, you're going to help against spoofing, protect against spoofing, phishing. It gives you the assurance, like we mentioned, about the domain, that it's from who it says it's from. It also helps protect against fraudulent mail. So, if you're a bank and you don't have DMARC set up, somebody could just say, hey, I'm your bank and I need your banking information. And it will look to the receiver, to the end user, that, yeah, it's from that bank. So it really helps protect that, combat spam and phishing. So, like we just mentioned, Dave just mentioned, if you have the reject policy set up, or, you have the quarantine set up, you can kind of get reports on what's happening and who's trying to use your domain inappropriately. And then it also keeps the spam in the spam folder and keeps the legitimate mail in the inbox. Anybody want to add anything on benefits?
We're talking about all the security components of it, but probably one of the biggest things I had success when I project managed the secure email project for a certain local healthcare system was it's the marketing benefits, right? So one of our security engineers was quick to point out that while all of this has security protections to it, it definitely has marketing bonuses to it, right? Because DMARC improves deliverability. It's kind of the stuff that Dave talked about earlier, is the importance of having this, not only from a security point of view, is the marketing point of view. It ensures deliverability, right? And as more email vendors start to take, DMARC into account, just like they did with HTTPS, right? It's going to help with the deliverability. So if you want an extra reason why you want your marketing emails to go through, implementing DMARC is one of them.
And if you think about the importance, and we've talked a lot about the importance of the security teams helping the business and being more a part of the business, right? If you want to make a real splash, make your marketing teams happy about things that security is doing.
Absolutely.
I think another thing that I wanted to bring up also was, the reason that we're talking about this is to prevent spoofing, right? Well, there's 3 different types of spoofing, right? So you can spoof a domain name, but you can also have an issue with domain name imposters, where, for example, they may misspell your domain name and make it look like it's your domain name. So at a quick glance, it appears to be coming from your domain, and DMARC does not keep that from happening. It doesn't prevent that. This only prevents situations where somebody's trying to use your actual domain name, such as if people have heard about it, the WHO issue that came about, where malicious email is being sent out from the WHO domain, actually using the WHO domain name in the email. So it looked very legit. Well, they didn't have DMARC enabled, and that's why that occurred.
For sure. Okay, so let's move on into the Microsoft 365 DKIM overview. Some of this information we took from the Microsoft configuration, the links there in the slide if you want to check it out later, but we'll kind of give an overview of the key steps that you need to perform to set up DKIM and SPF. to establish DMARC policies on your 365 email domain or other domains, even non-email domains that you may want to protect. So essentially what's going to happen is that you're going to set up your DKIM to use a private key. And this inserts the encrypted signature into the message headers. It'll create a key pair. So it'll verify the domain, it'll look up the key, the public key that you've published in your DNS records. And if it's verified, that check's going to pass. And it's going to let the receiving email system know that, yep, okay, we look pretty good here. We've got reasonable assurance that, yes, this is the person, it's originating from who said it was, like we've discussed. It does use Microsoft 365 for Business, does use a default signing configuration. And I think this is true across all their Microsoft 365 offerings. If they don't have a policy in place. So if you don't set it up yourself, at least by default, it will create a key using your on Microsoft domain. So if you have a custom domain set up, like CSA.WMI.org that you'll want to use, your addresses, your signature is not going to align because it's going to look like it's coming from .onmicrosoft.com instead of CSA.WMI.org. So you will want to go through and make sure that you're setting up your own entries if you need beyond the default configuration. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go through and cover a new DKIM implementation. There are ways to change your keys and do some additional aspects after it's already established, but those are out of the scope for our conversation today. And if you do go through and want to do this, make sure that you're an admin role in your tenant, and you will need to be able to, if you want to use PowerShell. Actually, I think you need to use PowerShell for some of this to connect to your 365 environment that way.
Yes. A couple other things that are good to know related to DKIM is that DKIM by itself does not determine what to do if the signature is good or bad. There's no reporting mechanism to this, and it does not say whether your sending server is allowed to send outgoing email in and of itself. That's why you need both DMARC, DKIM, and SPF, as you'll see.
Yep. Okay. So this is the concise, if you will, specifics on the PowerShell commands that you'd need to run for the DKIM aspect for the 365 configuration. You're going to generate your keys. You can verify that the keys are working correctly through that PowerShell command, the DKIM signing config. You'll publish your CNAME records, which you can see there. You'll enable it in Exchange, and then you probably want to send a test message and verify the headers that everything looks good, and you've got your signature in here, and you're good to go with your DKIM configuration. What would you guys like to add about these entries?
I'll just reiterate what you said already, that it does require PowerShell usage. You have to be able to log in using PowerShell into your Office 365 domain. So you're going to need, those permissions to be able to do that.
For sure. So this first one here, you can see that you're going to put your domain name in here. We're using a key size of 2048. I think you can use a smaller key size, although I went
yes, you can use 1024, and actually 1024 is more common.
And then let's see.
Can you guys explain what that key size thing is for the novices in the room here? Like, what's the difference between a 1024 and a 2048?
It's the bit. I mean, it's the number of bits you're encrypting with.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So the 2048 more secure. I guess
it is more.
They're more at 1024 than at 2048.
It is more secure. There's just certain systems out there that don't have the capability the way they're set up to decipher a larger key size.
Okay.
That's why 1024 is more common.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, I went with 2048, and obviously when like I mentioned, if this is already established and you wanted to change your key size, you could. But I went with 2048 just to kind of keep on the edge of where the encryption is going to be, and just kind of see what happens, I guess. Like Dave mentioned, 1024 is more popular, but if you do have problems and you go with a larger key size for your encryption, you can always change that later.
Okay.
Let's see. So you're going to need to publish the CNAME records. when you generate these inside of the 365, PowerShell environment, it's going to put it into these selector CNAMEs. Dave, I don't know if you can expand upon that. I'm not 100% expert in exactly on what this command's doing here. But basically, it's going to give you these selectors, which you need to then publish into your DNS records.
Yeah, so the selector name really doesn't matter that much. I mean, they use selector as an example. What's really important is after the dot, the underscore domain key must be exactly that. It has to be underscore domain key. The information prior to the dot can be pretty much anything you want.
Cool. All right. Moving on. So after you get your DKIM record set up, you're going to want to enable SPF as well. As we mentioned, DMARC, you need to be able to use DKIM, SPF, and DMARC together to give you the best protection for your domain. Just using one, it's going to pass a DMARC check, or it's going to pass a DKIM check, but it's not really going to give you the reporting or really give you a sense of what's happening. It just says, yep, okay, this is signed, and it looks to be who it's saying it's from. So you'll want to set up SPF, and that's the sender policy framework. And essentially, that's a list of your IP addresses for a given domain that are authorized to send email for that domain. They're normally checked against the mail from address, unlike DKIM, which checks against the from address. So, you don't really want to use SPF by itself. I guess you could, but that still allows for different spoofing and phishing scenarios because it's not protecting both the envelope and the actual body of the message, the contents of the message.
Yeah, it doesn't work as intended when it's used by itself. And the SPF, a lot of people think that it does other things, but it's really only intended for outbound email, not internal email within the organization.
Right, exactly. So you can see here in this example, which is straight from the Microsoft site, it's saying, hey, I'm Woodgrove Bank, but it's actually, we're this phishing site here. And when the recipient gets it, it looks like it's from Woodgrove Bank. And unless they're looking at their headers or understand, about DMARC, DKIM, and SPF, they're not going to go in here most likely and see that, oh yeah, there's a mismatch here. And it's really not who it says it's from. Okay.
Yeah. A couple other things I would add here is if you're having trouble creating your SPF record, a couple tools you can use. One is spfwizard.net will actually help you create it, but then you can also check it against MX Toolbox to make sure that it's accurate or working, if you will.
Yeah,
and I think it's also really important to, if you're dealing with any third parties, that they have support for SPF, and make sure you get their info prior to getting ready to create your SPF record.
Yeah, and we'll go over what an SPF record example would look like here in a minute. But yeah, there's a little bit different, I think, between those providers, how the SPF record's formatted. But I think there's a basic format that everybody follows. So it should be straightforward when you look at those entries. We did want to touch on how 365 handles inbound mail that fails DMARC. Dave, if you'd like to speak to this slide.
Yeah, so basically Office 365, or Microsoft 365 as it's called now, does a little bit differently. So as it states here, when you're using your reject or quarantine messages, or if you're set at none, it actually treats reject and quarantine in the same exact way. There's no difference. And as you can read here,
interesting. That I didn't know that. That's a little disconcerting.
And they're saying basically it's configured this way because some legitimate email may fail DMARC.
All right, I can argue both for and against that thought process. Okay, no, good to know. Thank you.
You're not going to argue to or for, or you're just going to say you can do it? I could do it.
I could do it, but we have a time crunch. And I
We'll save that
ramble
for
a
another
lot.
episode.
Absolutely. So yeah, as Dave mentioned, it does handle it a little bit differently here than some other providers would. So just keep that in mind as you think about, as you set this up, how 365 will handle those failures. So you can see here that this is what an example SPF record looks like, CNAME record looks like. This is for the bulk configuration that we're moving into now, but the records will still apply. You'll see in our SPF record here that there's 2 entries, and one of these is for the Microsoft system, and the other one here that we're using in our example is MailChimp. So again, this will vary slightly depending on your provider, but this is typically what it's going to require. You're going to have to go into your bulk mail provider and verify your domain. They're going to give you a CNAME record that they want you to add to your DNS. In this case, this is the one that MailChimp suggests, and we used for ours. As you can see, if you looked up our DNS entries, which you could use MX Toolbox for, as Dave mentioned earlier, and then they'll have you put this text record in. If you are using a different provider, or you've got some other configuration, or you're not using 365, you're not going to have this include statement here with the Outlook.com in it. So again, double check your configuration as you set this up.
Yeah, I don't know how often you would run into this, but large organizations, there is a hard limit to what you can put in your include statement, which is 10. You can't go above that without doing some other things, which is kind of beyond the scope of our presentation today. But
yeah, for sure. No, that's an important note, Dave, because as marketing departments like to do, they love to send out all kinds of things as different domains. And I think, Aaron, you can, if you're still there, looks like you may have stepped away, but can talk to that. You've really got to work with your organization to kind of get your bulk mail providers list down. You've got to really be mindful about how many different people you're going to let send as your domain. So as you're setting this up for your org, keep in mind that you'll need to go through and do some identification on all of who your bulk mail providers are, what your marketing department's doing, and how your organization is communicating out externally, because this will get unwieldy fairly quickly. And as Dave mentioned, you've got a cap of 10. You can't put more than that in there. So moving on here, this is, again, we use CLOUDFLARE for managing our DNS and our domain. These are the full records that we made entries for in the CLOUDFLARE configuration, based on the 365 configuration in our bulk mail provider configuration. You're going to have your DMARC text record here, and this is where your policies are set. Today, we're using none, as we discussed. That just kind of, does its thing and lets the email in. We're not doing any reject or quarantine. This is really to help us get an understanding of, it's important to have that baseline first to understand your mail and what's being rejected or what's being flagged before you move on into a quarantine or reject period, so you're not missing messages that may be legitimate. You're going to have your CNAME records here. Again, these first couple here are from Microsoft. These are the ones that they ask you to put in to identify your DKIM, and then this is the one for MailChimp, as we saw on the previous slide. And again, here's the SPF record examples. Anybody would like to add anything here?
So with us using CLOUDFLARE, is CLOUDFLARE a free service, or how does that work, Lloyd? Or is that just for people's knowledge?
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, go out and check it out. There is free tiers available. We're using the free service right now for our DNS management, for our records that are in there. So yeah, I mean, based on your needs, you're going to want to take a look at what their different service offerings are, but they do have some free options available.
Okay.
So the other thing I think I would call out here too is the at the very end of the SPF record, the -, which is basically a hard fail. You can do the I think it's called a tilde all, which gives you more of a soft fail scenario.
Yeah, and then there's the question mark as well. So thank you, Dave. It's good you pointed that out, because when I originally set this up, I had made an error in our entries, and I had a question mark here, which basically means to the receiving systems that it really can't, it's just not going to do anything. It's just like, well, yeah, sure, you've got it, great. I don't know what you want me to do with it. So as you're looking through this, the syntax here, yeah, you want to make sure you use, typically you're going to see the -all. Dave, I don't know if there's configurations where you'd want to use the tilde or want to use the question mark.
Yeah, I think that the tilde just basically says the message is accepted, but it's not compliant to the system. I don't really know why you would want to use that in that manner, because if you're truly trying to be secure, you're going to want to use the -all.
Yeah, for sure. And we're getting down towards the end here, so I think this is our last slide as we wrap this up. Some additional considerations, use DMARC to protect your non-email enabled domains. So if you've got other domains out there that you're utilizing for your organization that you're not sending email from, people could still set up spoofing or phishing attempts from those domains, and you can utilize DMARC to protect those. And give you some level of assurance that, yep, if somebody sends email from this domain, look, it's not us. We don't send email from here. You should reject that, or let it go right to your spam folder.
Yeah, that would include like if you have a .net or .org type domain that you're not necessarily using or not sending email from, or maybe you have some domains they're yours, but you're not really using them for anything. They're just parked. You're going to want to protect those as well.
Absolutely. Dave, would you like to speak to the reporting aspects of DKIM, DMARC?
Yeah, sure. So, as we talked about, when you've set up DMARC and you're deciding whether to use none, quarantine, or reject, in almost all cases, you're going to want to start at none. But so how do you get information to find out what that's really doing for you? From a Microsoft 365 standpoint, you actually have a free account that you can get with ValoMail, where you can actually see that reporting and what's coming in. So as you now move from none to quarantine and then reject, you can see that information and get feedback on what that's doing.
Yeah, and it'll help you make decisions about how, when you would be ready to move into those, quarantine and reject phases of your policy, as you're taking a look at that. So here at the bottom, kind of talk about the DMARC record you'll need to add to set this up. This is specifically, again, for 365. And then, RUA is just reporting URI for aggregate data. So that kind of brings us to the conclusion of our presentation today. It's very high level. It kind of gives you a quick overview into DMARC and the DKIM and SPF records that you'd need to set up and create. Again, your configuration will be different depending on who you're using as your providers, but definitely feel free to reach out to us with any questions, CSA@csawmi.org, or take a look at our website, which is on the slide there below, csawmi.org. Anybody have any closing thoughts or anything you'd like to add as we wrap up our conversation today?
I think one thing I'd like to add is just that, there may be some people that believe that these records are really only used by large enterprises. That's not true. Any business, small, medium, or otherwise, should be implementing this to protect your organization.
Absolutely.
And we'll make sure that we have, some links, and then our contact information, as well as Dave's contact information, in the description of the video, if anyone has any questions or would like some assistance.
Yeah, Dave, I'm sure you'd be glad to help people out. So yeah, we'll definitely make sure your contact information is out there as well.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you, everybody, for your time today, and we'll look forward to seeing you in episode 6.
Like and subscribe.
Yes, please.